On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about Ferrari's sprint joy turning into a Grand Prix disaster, McLaren's win in the GP, and just a general roundup of China. Let's go. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Back of the Grid. I'm your host Tom and I'm joined as always by Chris.
Hello.
Hello. An interesting weekend I think, China. We've got a sprint weekend to talk about. Two very different races it felt. We normally like to think in the past that the sprint sets up the basis for the GP, but I think it was a little bit of a different story come Sunday, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was actually. The order was very different between the sprint and the race, I guess. Yeah, I mean, the tyres just didn't seem to do what anybody thought they were going to all weekend. And obviously they had a brand new track surface, which I suppose played into that. Yeah,
similarly getting compliments and slander at the same time. Like, there was a lot of, this circuit's so grippy, it's great, loving the new surface, but then after realising it was destroying the tyres, there was a little bit less enthusiasm around it. So,
because I think it was Ruth Buscombe I saw on Blind doing like a bit of analysis, and the sprint, I think the sprint pole time from last year to this year improved by like 5 seconds.
Yeah, well, there were laps that Hamilton was doing during the sprint sessions, and then equally Norris, I think, doing in the GP sessions that were literally the fastest laps that have ever been done on that circuit.
Yeah.
So Lewis first with his sprint quali laps, and then Norris with some of his times in GP qualifying. So yeah, definitely made it a faster surface. Probably allowing him to get a bit more of a slingshot out of some of those longer corners would be my guess. Trying to carry more speed onto the straight, but I think you saw a lot of compromise in setup because of that as well. It led to a lot of people going with a very loose rear end, pointy front end in order to stop the front scrubbing, because they seemed like the front left in particular was really difficult to manage for people. So to try and stop that scrubbing, they were going with a little bit of a more pointy front end, and then you just saw people constantly losing the rear. And that's where a lot of people were losing time in like quali sessions, was coming out of turn 13, I want to say it is, onto the big back straight, like losing time from Norris on more than one occasion, losing the back end and stepping out. I think Hamilton had a situation with that. Like, so a few of them, even the big boys up the front end, were struggling with that from time to time.
Yeah, and I mean, like when the two Ferraris made contacts on the opening lap, I think that was sort of a result of Leclerc kind of washing out a little bit. You had Bortoletto's spin, which I think as well was just sort of the rears not wanting to play ball. Yeah.
Should we do a race recap then, or a weekend recap in general? I think you're going to go through team by team, right?
Yeah, we'll have a little dive through as usual. Piastri obviously came back from a pretty disappointing home race to actually his first Grand Prix pole. I didn't realise until I mentioned he's had a couple of sprint poles, but this is his first actual Grand Prix pole.
Yeah, I never thought about that.
Yeah, turned into a win in a fairly comfortable drive all in all. He generally looked more comfortable all weekend. I think McLaren sort of hinted at it. I think this sort of this track and this characteristics kind of leaned away from what Norris likes in a car and how a car behaves. So Norris sort of looked a bit on the back foot all weekend, really. Piastri definitely on top. Takes him back to within 10 points of Norris. When you couple that with the P2 he had in the sprint, which, again, really good drive from Piastri in the sprint. Like, the qualifying wasn't there, but he sort of brought that back quite nicely. And he's good for the championship, right? Like, the last thing we want is to have the same driver win the first 2 or 3 races and open a gap that sort of is there more or less for the rest of the season. Like, we've got 2 winners in 2 races now. It's nice and close. That's what we want for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's good about this is, as good as the McLaren is, it's clearly the fastest car, but we're at least in a situation where the others are close enough that... So, like, my point here is going to be, like, Norris struggled for consistency this weekend, and Oscar was more consistent and managed to turn it into something. But Norris being inconsistent was costing him significant places in teams that have dominated in the old Mercedes eras of the Red Bull. Even if you had a little bit of a slip up during qualifying and had a little bit of a ragged lap that was a little bit loose and a little bit, imperfect, you'd still be seeing a 1-2. Like it was still, like, I think to sort of the Rosberg Hamilton era, if one of them was ragged, it just meant they were starting behind on the front row. Like,
yeah, they were second rather than first.
They were still first and second on pretty much every occasion. Here, we're at least seeing if Norris or Piastri can't string sessions together and string laps together, it's compromising them with the wider grid, which is good to see. And I mean, from a perspective, well, not if you're a McLaren fan or a Norris fan, but from a general viewing perspective, that's good to see. And I think it's also good that we're getting a bit of a mixture of who is that next team. Like, obviously, Verstappen looked really good in the wet in Australia, but here in China, he was sort of in touching distance throughout most of the weekend, but there were times where the Ferraris looked like actually genuinely quicker than the McLarens at one stage, briefly, even if McLaren eventually got on top of that. So it's really interesting to see that, things are sort of falling into a bit of a nice potential for some back and forth through the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And the McLaren not bulletproof either. Norris nursing that braking issue for the closing stage of the race. Really interesting one for the team to be able to not just see what was happening, but predict how it was likely to develop. In the end, he still held on for second. Russell was like less than a second and a half behind in the end. I'm sure Norris was as best he could managing that gap, knowing how much of the race was left. But a little bit spicy towards the end. Yeah,
definitely.
I've not seen any sort of talk about them dissecting exactly what went wrong there yet, but
no.
But we'll see soon, I'm sure. Should we do Ferrari next?
I think we need to, don't we?
I mean, things started off pretty well. Sprint-wise, Hamilton was sprint pole, wasn't he? Yes, he was.
Yeah. Sprint pole and win. Converted.
Followed up with a win. Technically his first win for Ferrari, but it doesn't really count. But I mean, Ferrari looked good. He looked very comfortable in the car, happy with the way it was driving. It seemed to be decent on its tyres. And then they made some setup changes ahead of qualifying, and it just seemed to completely take both of them in the wrong direction.
Should have left it alone.
Yeah. Ended up 5th and 6th on the grid. As mentioned, they had a coming together in the on the opening lap, which was it was Leclerc being a little bit ambitious, I think, but it was one of those things. It was an opening lap kind of instant, I think. Didn't seem to make much difference that he was missing an end plate for most of the race.
It helped him.
Yeah. I mean, Bernie Collins in commentary said, like, there's genuinely a possibility that the way that's changed the aero is actually helping his front left survive a bit better through that long turn one.
I've seen a lot of that on the F1 TV coverage, that the way it was drooping far enough that it was actually touching the floor was probably a benefit, because it was sealing an airflow under that front left.
They also traded places during the race, which, if you only listen to the team radio that was broadcast, made it sound a lot like Hamilton was being told to let Leclerc through and he was arguing against it. In reality, it was Hamilton that suggested they swap places because he knew Leclerc was faster than him. So Ferrari were a little bit upset about that like it kind of pushed a narrative that didn't exist, and like F1 have said, oh no, we weren't trying to do that. It's just they just were the bits of radio we happened to choose. But yeah, quite funny that already it's like, oh, are they falling out? Are they having a rivalry already? Like, no, he was suggesting you let him pass. But
clearly got a Drive to Survive director in the distribution team, what you want to call
next
it.
series is going to be a whole episode about how that was the beginning of their massive rivalry.
Yeah.
They finished where they started, 5th and 6th.
Yeah.
But as it turned out, it was all for nothing because it was not only a rare double disqualification, but a rare double disqualification for different reasons on each car.
Yeah.
In Hamilton's case, it was a skid block that had been worn too much and was thinner than it should be. I believe it was something silly like a millimetre or two, but that's the rule.
Rule is rule.
Yeah. In the case of Leclerc, it was for an underweight car. They actually rewired the car with a new front wing on to replace the bit that had fallen off.
Yeah.
But it was still underweight, which again is just a clear disqualification, and it's a pretty silly mess up on both counts, really, isn't it? Like, these are both things that they know are measured and that they factor into the way the cars are set up. So, yeah, pretty poor.
Yeah, not ideal. I mean, it was an okay result for them. They'll definitely be more disappointed now, but I think they'd have been slightly disappointed with 5th and 6th after how well they were going in the sprint race. I'm hopeful that they at least understand what they changed and what went in the right direction to be able to get that pace back, because I was sort of looking at that pace round certain bits of that circuit and kind of thinking you're starting to see maybe the Monza win potential there, because you've obviously got that huge straight here. There's like it's not quite the same thing, obviously. There's a lot more twists and turns in China, but I think there's elements of, your high speed corners, your long straights, and trying to find a balance between reducing the drag enough to not be slow in those sectors whilst being quick in the middle sector. So yeah, glimpses of what could be, I think, with the sprint stuff. So hopefully they keep the car over minimum weight and set up correctly for the remainder of the season.
As it is, that leaves them on just 17 points in 5th place behind Williams, but only just ahead of customer team Haas. Just really not a great opening to the season at all for them. Unfortunate
and at least unreflective of where they should be. Like, it's not like they're there and they're struggling. They've just had a terrible weekend this weekend. Well, a terrible Sunday and less of a terrible Saturday, I guess.
There is pace in that car. They just don't seem to be able to find it consistently at the moment.
I think they've genuinely probably tweaked the setup to try and conserve tyres after what they've learnt about the tyres up till the end of sprint. And then when Parc Fermé is obviously lifted and they can make changes between the sprint race and qualifying, they've probably made changes to try and conserve the tyres in some way, and it's caused them to lose pace, and they'd have probably been better having the pace that they had in the sprint and just having to manage the tyre situation better with strategy. I think that would have ultimately been the better play for them, but yeah, who knows for sure.
Hamilton was on the only front runners that did a 2-stop strategy, which I actually quite like that they did that. Like, he was kind of in a position where he wasn't catching anyone. Verstappen was behind him at that point, but kind of slowly catching. Probably would have caught past him. So they sort of, I like they were kind of proactive and like, well, let's just bring him in. We'll lose that place that he's looking like we're going to lose anyway. See what we can do with a fresh tyre. As it was, they couldn't do much with it, but I kind of likes that they did that a little bit.
Yeah.
Next, Mercedes. Russell on the podium again. he did briefly run second after he undercut Norris around the pit stops, but just didn't have pace to hold him behind. But even so, Russell just looks... He's doing a really good job this year so far. Like, he's qualifying very well, and just consistently putting in good performances.
Yeah, I think from Russell, this is another example of just quietly going about getting the best out of the car. Like, not quite as anonymous as Melbourne, for sure, but it was... Because obviously he was fighting with Norris, but he was seen at the right times and never at the wrong times. Like, just a quiet, I'm going to bring this car home in the best position possible. And I think that is legitimately the case for them at the minute. And it reflects in his standings position as well. Obviously, he's third overall in the standings as well. Yeah. Weirdly Verstappen between him and Norris, though, and not.
Yeah.
But I guess Piastri had his issues in Melbourne, didn't he? So
yeah.
And
then Antonelli, better qualifying this week. Is into Q3, started 8th. He strategically, I think he did more or less the same. Yeah, more or less the same as Russell. He came in a little bit earlier, so he did a longer second stint on the hards. He did have some floor damage though. Presumably, it was Leclerc's end plate that he ran over. And damaged his floor, so that he kind of got a bit stuck, didn't he? Kind of through the pit cycle, he lost a place or two. I mean, Ocon passed him on track. He did climb back up a bit towards the end, and obviously with the disqualifications, gained a few more places to finish 6th in the end. So another points result for him. I think at this point in his career, still pretty solid. Still good performance all around. Red Bull, you've already kind of mentioned Verstappen. Again, just kind of still racking up some points, 4th this time. Clearly a really difficult car, but he's doing a very good job at driving it. Had to pass Leclerc in the closing stages, which was a really good bit of racing. Really good. Really, like from both of them. But yeah, Verstappen to position his car to make that pass work was very, very cool. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, despite everything around Red Bull, he's still, as you say, still second, still very much within touching distance. So, you know, if Red Bull can bring some upgrades that improve that car, like, way too early to write him off for being in this championship fight.
Yeah, and the thing is, despite not being in the fastest car, like, I mean, I still think the majority of the time the Mercedes and the Ferrari are faster than it on paper. I think he's a very interestingly calm demeanour. Like, he's not letting the fact that the car is not as good as the others get to him or anything like that. I mean, whether he keeps that throughout the season is another matter. But like, he's just quietly getting the job done and having some actually decent on-track battles with people on occasion, which is really good to see.
Yeah, I think he knows he's getting everything he can out of it. He knows the team, at least like strategically, I think the team is still doing the best they can. So, you know, obviously the car's not where he wants it to be, but in terms of like race performance, I think they are getting everything possible out of that.
Yeah.
Sadly, other side of the garage. Lawson, slowest in both qualifying sessions over the weekend. He sort of made some progress through the field in both the races, but still nowhere near being in the points. Sort of seemed to try various setup changes. He had another pit lane start to make more setup changes, and just none of it seems to be helping. Like, he just keeps saying, constantly talking about how much he's struggling to turn the car in. The grip, like after his pit stop, he seemed happy with the grip for like a lap or two, and then it just seemed to fall off for him again. It's just really not working for him, and it's really rough to watch again.
I mean, I wonder if you're sort of starting to see something that people like the likes of Alex Albon have spoken about in the past, just a lot sooner for Lawson, which is the fact that it's so pointy on that front end, it's so nervous, it's so twitchy that if you're too aggressive with it, if you're too tense with it, you ultimately just lose time hand over fist and even lose the car completely. And the worst thing is, the more stressed you get about that, the tenser you end up then driving, and then the more mistakes you end up making in it.
Compounds the problem.
And then, you only have to look at the stress that you see through Lawson's face every single session, every single time you see him in the paddock, and then compare it to literally the exact opposite, cool, calm, collected Verstappen that I've just mentioned, and then look at the results. You can see how that does play into it, and being tense and nervous with the car is probably leading to a lot of lost lap time, especially when it's already more difficult to drive than previous seasons. It's not going to help matters.
I mean, next race is at least at a track he knows very well. He's raced Suzuka in... I don't think he's raced Suzuka in F1, but he's certainly raced it in feeder series and I think in Super Formula.
Formula, yeah.
That's going to help. But, it just feels like we're watching the same old Red Bull second driver problems, repeating themselves.
At what point do we have to, seriously look at the fact that almost nobody you put next to Verstappen can drive the car like he can? People can say what they want about, the car's made for him. I think at some point you've got to rubbish that, because at some point there would be somebody with a similar enough driving style that it would work. And yet he is leagues above nearly every teammate that you put against him. At what point do you have to start saying he just is that much better than all these other drivers?
I mean, what's more likely? Is it that Kvyat, Gasly, Albon, Perez, and Lawson are all this bad of a driver? Or is it more possible that the car just doesn't suit anyone other than Max Verstappen? It's really... Because, I mean, all the drivers on that list, we've seen good things from them, some more so than others, but none of them seem to be able to do what they need to in that second Red Bull seat, and none of them seem to have the time to turn things around. There's already a question in the inbox that we'll get to, but there's the rumours around Lawson are already swirling with 2 races in. It's tough, man. I feel for all of them. It's absolutely the hardest seat to be in Formula One, and it feels like the media are just waiting to pounce every time someone new steps into it. But we'll talk a bit more about that later on, I think.
Yeah.
Next on the list, surprisingly, is Haas. After looking completely lost in Australia, they were just didn't know what was wrong with the car. All of a sudden, they've turned up looking very comfortable, very fast, double points finish, 2 great drives from both their drivers. Crazy the difference a week can make.
Yeah, I'm quite pleasantly surprised by it, to be brutally honest with you. Considering all the way through testing, they looked like they were going to be the slowest, alongside maybe Sauber.
Yeah.
And then turning up to Australia, it's weird though, isn't it? Because when you think about the Australia result, and you look at Sauber being in the points, obviously Hülkenberg with 7th. I know we had the spinning accident for Bortoletto, didn't we? So we didn't know exactly where he might have finished, but Hülkenberg being in the points and then the Haas guys being in around about the same sort of position, I think that it's going to be a really interesting back and forth between those two teams down the bottom. And it shows that despite them being clearly the slowest, it shows how close the actual grid is overall. Because for teams like Sauber and Haas to be picking up points like they have in Australia and China already this season, the only thing that's going to really hinder them is if the bigger teams start out developing them through the season. Yeah. But with 2026 on the way next year, how many of the big teams are, unless they're like in a big title fight and they've got huge potential and a title is going to rest on it, even the big teams are going to start switching off, and that might open even more doors for the likes of Sauber and Haas, like what they've had in these first couple of races. So
yeah, because they've kind of done the opposite, haven't they? Like, we came out of testing thinking Sauber looked terrible, Haas a bit better. First race, Haas disaster, Sauber picked up points out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And then this race, suddenly Haas have got a double points finish. Sauber are absolutely terrible. So, yeah, I think it's going to flip-flop. I think it's going to be really close pretty much all the way down the championship, honestly. But yeah, Ocon, he started 11th on the grid and made a lot of kind of early passes to cement his position, including that pass on Antonelli when he was half on the grass, which was very bold, but exactly the kind of pass you expect from Ocon.
Yeah.
Ollie Behrman did the opposite. He was one of the ones that he started on the hards and then switched to the mediums. I guess the advantage starting on the hards is you can go to the mediums a bit earlier and spend more time on them because the car's a bit lighter. Yeah. So he actually went longer on the mediums than he went on the hards. But yeah, really made it work. There was a phase towards it's sort of in the second half of the race where like every other lap it cut to Ollie Behrman passing someone else.
Yeah, really good drive.
Yeah, good drives from both of them. Really impressed. Likewise, Albon, another points finish for him. I mean, in a race where you're managing your tyres to turn it into a one-stop, Albon's the kind of driver you want in there. He went longer on that first set of mediums than anybody else, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Him and Hulkenberg both made 20 laps on the opening set. Bit of a struggle for Sainz this weekend. He didn't look nearly as comfortable as he did last time out. Where was he in qualifying? I've lost him. Yeah, only 15th.
Only 15th. Yeah, he just made it through Q1.
I mean, it was tight. It was like a tenth and a bit to Albon, but yeah, as it was, he ended up getting points as a result of the disqualifications. He finished 10th, which, as I said, I think in the Discord at the weekend, Sainz getting his first points for Williams by other cars getting disqualified and him inheriting them feels very on brand for both Sainz and Williams. So yeah, it all tracks.
More notably that it's a Ferrari disqualification that gets him points, I think.
I've heard this story before.
Yeah. Hey, and his new team, his Williams team, is above Ferrari in the standings. Currently the right choice to have made, Carlos.
I think he's only something like the third driver to score points for both Williams and Ferrari or something like that. He's in a very exclusive club.
Mansell and wait.
Prost, I think.
Prost was never at... Oh, yeah. Prost was at Williams, wasn't he?
Yeah. The Williams and Ferrari driver clubs are very small.
Yeah.
But yeah. Who's next? Aston Martin. Another DNF for Alonso, 2 in a row. This time it was a brake failure. We heard Gasly trying to tell teacher on him.
Yeah.
His brakes are on fire. Like, yeah, I'm sure he's aware. Sure he's more than aware. And also for the second race in a row, Stroll was pretty good.
It was all right. I mean, he looked into his points through DQs, though. At least for the GP.
Yeah. But he scored in the sprint as well, didn't he? Or he was there or there?
No, he was just short in the sprint.
Oh, he was just outside,
ninth.
yeah. But yeah, another like all right drive for Stroll.
Considering the car doesn't look great, I suppose it's not that bad.
Yeah.
This is the thing, though. Like, when you've got to praise Lance Stroll for finishing in the middle of the pack with a quiet race, you know something's wrong when that's what you've got to praise him for.
Yeah, I mean, the qualifying gap between him and Alonso was pretty tiny. Again, is that because Alonso has kind of taken his eye off the ball a bit because he doesn't really care when he's racing for 10th?
Yeah.
Who knows? We'll see what happens if Adrian Newey gives them a front-running car next year, I suppose.
Yeah.
RB next. And once again, they were in a great position and just absolutely botched it. Like both the cars qualified well, running in the points at the start. Genuinely looked like the fastest kind of best of the rest midfield team for a lot of this weekend. And then everyone around them moved to a one stop and they just went ahead and two stopped and came out of it with nothing, 0 points. Like, you know, people like to make all the jokes around Ferrari strategy, but RB they just consistently do the wrong thing. We saw it so many times last year with Ricciardo, and we're seeing it again now this year with both cars. Like, it's so frustrating to watch because they deserve way more points than they've got already.
What's worrying overall, though, which I'm guessing we'll cover at some point later, is on both race weekends now and and then the sprint as well, these cars are finishing ahead of Lawson. Mm-hmm. That's despite all these issues. Like, I mean, Yuki's ended up literally back of the pack this weekend, probably mainly because of the front wing damage that he picked up just randomly, where his front wing just decided, nope, had enough.
I'm out.
Yeah.
But yeah, he had to make a whole extra pit stop because of that. So that makes sense. But yeah, Hadjar was ahead of Lawson. About 3 seconds up the road.
And then you've got the points finish for Tsunoda in the sprint. Hadjar was then again ahead of Lawson in the sprint. Finished ahead of Lawson, literally the place in front of him.
Yeah.
And then it's why he's adding fuel to the flames, I guess, of all these rumour mills, is things like that. So you've gone from Hadjar being this question mark, like, was he really ready, didn't get to the grid, or all this, to now suddenly was finished ahead of Lawson into a sprint race and a GP. So, yeah.
But I mean, you mentioned the sprint then. That says everything you need to know about RB. The only points I've scored so far this season, despite having a pretty quick car, is in the sprint, which is the one place that scores points, but there isn't any strategy for them to mess up.
Yeah.
Like, the one point where it's just left to the driver, and he came home with some points.
Yeah. I suppose that's a telling thing for Ferrari with Hamilton as well, isn't it? Because Ferrari is classically bad
exactly.
at blundering the strategy. So that's so basically what we're learning is the sprint race is for those who can't do strategy. And that's why we're going to get mixed up results this season at every sprint race.
Yuki must be desperate for more sprint races at the moment.
That's our Ferrari, probably.
And then last team we haven't mentioned is Alpine. Gasly finished just outside the points. I think he's been 11th twice now, but he then got disqualified for the same reason as Leclerc. Doohan, all right again. I think he was pretty close in qualifying.
Yeah, it was okay.
But yeah, he was out in Q1 this time and didn't quite have the race pace. Yeah, it was a couple of tenths between them in qualifying. No, 1 tenth between them in qualifying, but that was...
Where was Gasly actually placed at the end of the race before his disqualification? Was he like 11th or something, I think?
Yeah, he's finished 11th in both races now.
Yeah.
Doohan did get involved in a couple of interesting incidents. I think he's already on 4 penalty points now. Very much deserved for I can't remember who it was that he had coming together with in this race now.
Bortoleto. It was Bortoleto in the sprint. He tried to go up the inside of him a little bit late, and I don't know, because he sort of started moving in almost slow motion, like he almost stopped on the apex and then suddenly started again and drove into the side of him. Like I thought he'd saved it at one point. Yeah, maybe it was a lock up or something, but
it's almost like he overbraked.
Yeah, it was like he sort of stopped the incident, but then lifted off the brake to roll around the corner and then rolled into him anyway. It was weird.
Yeah, very weird.
I think it was Bortoleto. It was definitely one of the Saubers. I'm pretty sure it was Bortoleto.
But yeah, the only team without any points so far, Alpine, which is disappointing given out of testing we thought they had made a step forward. But
Yeah,
not
unfortunate.
Yet. Let's do some awards.
Yeah, let's. Driver of the day. Who have you got any candidates for driver of the day? I've put mine forward in the doc, but I don't know about you.
I'll tell you who it's not.
Go on.
Kimi Antonelli, who won the official one.
Yeah, I found that really weird. Like, I don't know if that was some Reddit banter or something. That like,
I have seen a suggestion that there could potentially be a subset, probably of Reddit people, who are trying to manipulate the driver of the day vote to help their fantasy F1 teams.
Oh, why? Does the driver of the day get points now?
I think it has something to do with the way they work out the points, yeah.
I need to read the rules of fantasy F1 a bit better.
There might be a bit of manipulation going on there.
That's quality.
Who actually is it? I mean, Piastri did a great job to win the race. I think Russell was really impressive. I think I'm looking at the Haases, though.
Yeah.
Both the Haas guys did a really good job in that race.
For me, like, yes, you've got a race winner in Piastri, lights the flag. You've got George kind of just bringing it home clean in third. But they're sort of kind of, yes, they're good drives, but they're just what you expect of them in the cars that they're in. I think it was between the two Haas guys for me, with Ocon and Behrman, but then just the sheer number of overtakes that you actually saw Behrman pulling off on people, and to a degree, people he didn't really have any right making passes on. Like, well, I suppose it depends on how you look at it. Like, he shouldn't be making the moves that he made on Lawson into turn 14. That situation should not be presented to Oliver Behrman, that he can pull that move on Liam Lawson, considering the cars that they're both in and the situations that they're both in. So yeah, I think just for the, and then the chow. The chow on the radio every time he gets somebody into turn 14, he just chow, and then off he goes.
He actually looked really embarrassed about that when they asked him about it after the race. I thought it was quite funny though.
I think
I can go with Ollie though.
That whole package, like, great work from Haas in general, and I'd happily give it to either of them. But I think there's just one or two little bits on an entertainment level that give it to Behrman for me.
I think making the reverse strategy work so well as well, like, and to come in so early and keep the mediums going in that last stint while also making those moves. Yeah, I like that. We'll give it to Ollie.
Cool. What about move of the day? There's a couple. I mean, I was going to sort of throw a soft mention out there for Ollie for some of his switchbacks and things like that. I don't think any of them were better than the couple that we've got lined up.
Yeah, that's kind of.
But they were all really good.
Feel.
They were all really consistent. They were all, well, for the most part, they were on drivers and cars that you had no right making the move on, technically speaking. So a lot of good ones there from Ollie, but I think it was probably either going to be, at least for me, Ocon taking Antonelli. You mentioned it earlier in the podcast.
Yeah, half
by just doing some lawn mowing whilst he was out on the back straight. Or probably actually the one for me was that, again, I think you mentioned it earlier, the battle between Verstappen and Leclerc, because the battling for track position in turn 1 to then get the benefit in turn 2, and then Leclerc coming back at him a little bit into turn 4.
It was really good.
Everybody who's listened to this podcast for any length of time knows how much we like a move that goes on through multiple corners, like, or a whole sector of a track. So I think that one's up there for me. And just like seeing Verstappen having to fight like that for positions and making it work is because he's spent so much time over the last couple of years just being out there at the front and running away with it. I remember all these doubts of, like, when Hamilton spent all his time at Mercedes out the front, and when Vettel spent all his time out the front in the Red Bull. It was like, oh, can they even race once they're back in the pack? I don't think you've got any questions of that with Verstappen, at least not at this point. Like, watching them go wheel to wheel like that, him and Leclerc, is quality. I just want them. I just want to start seeing that for a race win. Like, just pull McLaren back in a little bit and have those kind of battles for race wins, and that would be great. That would be perfect.
Verstappen and Leclerc is always good value when they're going wheel to wheel as well. Like they there's a lot of respect between them, and they fight hard, but 9 times out of 10 fairly.
Hard but fair between between them. Yeah.
I think an honorable mention as well for when Norris came out of the pits and Russell pipped him for second place, and Russell kind of used Stroll to kind of block Norris in to make the move. Which that was some very good racecraft.
Yeah, good racecraft on that one. I
think that Verstappen one is the one that stands out for me as well.
Yeah, that's good. And then last award.
Honestly, what the f*** are we doing here?
I mean, we've already mentioned Tsunoda's front wing just piecing out. To be like, nah, not playing anymore.
Had enough.
I mean, obviously Ferrari, it feels just like too on the nose for us to mention Ferrari at this point of the podcast because we've done it so many times over the years. But man, it was like, getting it that wrong is just...
I think the comedy value, if we're just going to try and take the humour side of this as we do sometimes, I think you've got to look at the sprint trophies. I mean, we talked about it ahead. We talked about it ahead of the weekend in Discord with everyone there and coming up with comical thoughts for what the thought process was, and a lot of comments linking it to a poorly designed Lego model. Was I think the general summary.
Or my first 3D print.
Yeah. Oh, yes, that was another one. Like, it looked like someone was experimenting with a multicolour feed on a 3D printer for the first time, or something like that.
One of the worst trophies I've ever seen. It's awful.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess at least they had one this time. There were points last year where they sort of realised they didn't have a trophy and just wheeled out another one of those Pirelli pole position tyres.
Well, wasn't it? Am I not right in saying that up until now it was the medals for the sprint, or was that for something else? Oh no, they get medals for the Grand Prix now, don't they? So that the drivers have got something to keep for themselves.
Yeah, well, mostly so. MBS has an excuse to go on the podium.
Well, yeah, I suppose
so the FIA medal.
That's the main excuse. MBS being the centre of attention, as per.
Yeah, of course. I think it's the trophy for me. So if you haven't seen the trophies, go back and look at them. They're hilarious and tiny as well. It's like barely bigger than a can of Coke. This weird
It probably is 3D printed. The reason it's so small is because anyone that's owned a 3D printer has probably done this and seen a model, think that looks good, I'm going to print one of those, put it on the printer without really checking it properly during a slice, printed it, and then it's come out like half the size you thought it was going to, and then gone, I should have checked that before I printed it. Have you done it? Because I've done it.
Absolutely. Well, that print's finished quickly.
2 hours. It's because it's this big. Oh, yeah. Anyway, I'll move us on. We'll give it officially to those trophies just for the comedy value, and I'll move us on to predictions. So, not a good weekend for anyone in predictions world, I must say. I think the highest scoring people were 2 points. There were a lot of 2-pointers. You only got 1 point. I didn't get any. It was not a good weekend for anyone overall in the points. Just to clear up kind of rules, housekeeping, things like that with predictions. Number of finishes we've always conducted. The number of cars to finish the race is on there in the how to play section, just in case you want reference. But we've got 19 finishes there because technically 19 cars finished the race, so that's your correct answer there. But whenever it comes to finishing positions like race winner or random driver position, we obviously count those after penalties. So Ocon is 5th. I mean, nobody would have got that right even if he'd not been bumped up due to penalties, because I think the highest guess for Ocon this week was 10th. So even then, it'd have still not been high enough to get it right. So yeah, there'll be some half points out there, I think, for some people who guessed 10th, but that's about as high as it gets, I think, for that. So yeah, that's that. In terms of overall standings, that leaves Shelby as our leader still on 4 points, so that stays the same there. Over in F1 Fantasy, now I've learned about driver of the day, I'm going to keep my eye on Reddit because I want more points. Our winner this week for F1 Fantasy was Northern Ballamore with 296 points. And that also jumped Northern Ballamore into the lead overall with 517 points altogether. And then jumping to Grid Rival for Fantasy, Spartan 73B was our winner this week with 1,121 points. But Krusty Onion still leads the way there with 2,193. If you want to get involved with Predictions League, or you want to get involved with the F1 Fantasy or the Grid Rival Fantasy, head to backofthegrid.com, register for the Predictions League. It's always worth doing, because if you score 5 out of 5, you do win a prize. If you want to then get involved in the Fantasy Leagues, there's links to those there. And this year, we're also doing an IndyCar Fantasy League on Grid Rival, so there's a link to that all on the website. So head to backofthegrid.com and find all that there. Right, now that bit's done. Inbox.
Keep me saying now. Stay out. Box. Hey, man.
I'll go first. Chris McNulty says, with the sad passing of Eddie Jordan in mind, do you think we'll ever see a team named after a person again? Recent controversy over Andretti and naming rights being so valuable, it seems unlikely. It does seem unlikely, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, we've still got Williams out there, I guess. Flying Frank Williams as a name. And Sauber, technically. But even if it's not for long, using Peter Sauber's name. And then the last one will be... the last two will be Ferrari and McLaren, won't it?
Yeah. But even then, they're at a point now where...
It's a brand, not a person. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to see where another team like that could come from now. Even with Andretti, an Andretti team was only ever really going to exist because they had manufacturer backing, and in the end, it just became the manufacturer. So, yeah, I can't see anytime soon how an individual will be able to form a team like that, really.
Yeah.
Which is sad in a lot of ways, because it is looking back over some of the old Jordan wins in the last week after the sad news about Eddie Jordan. It was nice having those just completely independent, taking it to the big boys kind of teams on the grid, which you still have up to a point, but it's never quite the same.
Yeah, and I think that was always the great thing of most of Williams' career through 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, just being there as an independent, trying to take it to the manufacturers. Yeah, I mean, maybe we can one day look at some regulations that help bring teams like that back, but yeah, without that, I can't see. The cost cap was supposed to try and help with that, but I think the interesting thing is naming rights and things like that, isn't it? The advertising, these big brands that want to advertise want their name. I mean, you'll have to look at Williams, still running the Williams name, yes, but they're officially Atlassian Williams or something now, aren't they? So yeah, it just gets eaten up, unfortunately. Sad. Moving on, David says, do you think we could see Lewis-Nico type battles between Lando and Oscar? It's got potential to get spicy.
I do. Thinking about... we haven't seen much of them going wheel to wheel, but when we have, it's been pretty tasty, I think. I think Piastri especially, for such a kind of calm, collected driver, when he needs to, he can be very aggressive in wheel to wheel fighting, and it's got to happen sooner or later this season that they have a proper fight, and someone's always going to have to come off worse there. And I think it could potentially get tasty between them.
I think Sarah in the chat in Discord just kind of made a good point with saying yes and no. Probably won't get the off-track heat that Lewis and Rosberg had, but probably get the on-track heat to some degree, which I could go along with that. Yeah,
I think so. Next from Just J-Rod. Hey guys, as a more recent fan, do disqualifications go through a cycle when we're just in an upward cycle, or is the FIA doing something different at the moment? It's a good question. I don't think there's anything really different in terms of the way the rules are being applied or the way the rules work.
I think a lot of the common ones as well, these are two of the common ones that we've seen in recent years. Like cars not being the right weight, cars having incorrect skid plate left, and the other common one is usually some kind of fuel violation of some kind, whether it's like, or tyre pressures used to be a big one. Not so much these days, but it used to be one. So it's less of a problem now.
Aero surfaces being slightly too big or small is one that comes from time to time.
It was funny actually with this, because I remember talking to you briefly about it, the fact that one of the last times you got a double disqualification. So I was thinking more Gasly and Leclerc with this, because they obviously both got disqualified for being underweight. But the last time we got a double disqualification for a couple of drivers having similar issues was America 2023. It was Lewis and Leclerc again, and it was skid plates on that one. It was when the cars were into it, albeit Lewis was at Mercedes then and Leclerc was at Ferrari, but it was the cars running too low, and so it's not all that uncommon to see that kind of violation cost a driver a finishing position.
Yeah. I mean, Sarah in the Discord makes a good point that we're in a ground effect era, which requires cars to be run very close to the limits, as close to the ground as possible. So there is possibly something to that as well. Sarah also made the good point that when that did happen last time with those two drivers, a Williams driver got his first ever points for the team, which was Logan Sargent at the time. And
there you go.
See, there we go. That's all Williams needs. Yeah.
So what was it? What was the question? Wait, do we go through a cycle? No. Well, yeah, I think we do. That is a cycle. Two drivers get disqualified for something like just basic, like a weight issue or a skid plate issue, and then a Williams driver gets their first point because of the promotion. There you go.
There we go. There's your cycle.
Give it 2 years. We need to go back to 2021 and see if anything like that happened in 2021 now. Definitely. Right, next one. Coryzilla Zombie Killer. There's a bit to this one, so I'll quickly try and run through it and then we'll answer it. So, do you think a recipe for a good sprint weekend is to have an ever-changing collection of sprint weekends on the calendar, or was the reason that this sprint weekend was so good just because we went into the race without knowing how the hards could do? So, two angles to that. And I think the first part of that is, rather than going to the same track every single season to do the sprint weekend, the variety of mixing it up. So, some years it's Australia, other years it's Japan, other years it's China, and so on. It's not always the same circuits every year, I think is the point of the first bit.
Yeah, which I'm... There's an argument in both directions for that. Like, I think it is good to rotate them so you're always getting something new, something different, because I do think having a sprint weekend messes up the kind of normal weekend calendar, adds a bit of uncertainty. Obviously, the more often you go to the same place to do that, the less uncertain it is. But at the same time, I think the sprint format just isn't suited to a lot of tracks on the calendar. So there's a balance to be found there, I think.
I think as well, touching on the other part of this question too, with not knowing how the hards were going to do, I think that is kind of part of it in a way, but it's the reason that that's the case is mainly because of the surface. It was it was a complete unknown. So I think throwing a sprint weekend at a track that's just been resurfaced, where you've got extremely limited practice time and a whole new surface to learn and understand, and we've never had running on that surface since they've changed it. I think you've just kind of got a bit of a perfect storm of enough unknown there that even if drivers know the track pretty well, there's differences. Like, I think that's maybe one of the reasons you saw someone like Hamilton winning the sprint is because he's what was it, something like a 4 or 5 time winner at China across his career. So he's got multiple wins under his belt there. So there's an element of, even though that surface has changed, he has been there and won there so many times. He can adapt quickest to that change, and look what happens. He's on pole for the sprint and wins the sprint. As the other teams slowly start to catch up on that and understand that a bit better, the order falls a little bit more back into regular form, I guess. But even then, like the likes of the Haas we've already talked about, there's so much going on there just because there's a lot of unknowns. So I think it's just like a bit of a perfect storm. But I do agree on moving them to different circuits each year is beneficial for not only the circuits because of having the opportunity to host one of those kind of weekends, but also just for us as fans, because I don't want to watch a sprint weekend at Austria every single season because it's just going to lose any little appeal that it has. I mean, it doesn't. We talk about that the sprints don't have that much appeal, but if they can be as mixed up compared to the GP order as what we've seen this weekend, I could get more on board with the sprints. So let's just resurface every track and then have a sprint weekend. Let's do that. The most recently resurfaced tracks should be the sprint weekend tracks.
Add on to get them.
That's the way we do it.
Last question this week from Nick Deaton, who asks, do Red Bull swap Lawson for Yuki this season? And if so, when? And will Red Bull ever have an even driver pairing while Max is in the team? I mean, there's already media talk today about them swapping him for Yuki before Japan, which I just think is...
It's weird. Do you know what? Like, I can't see even Red Bull being that ruthless, but also I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if we went into the Japan weekend with, we're going to let Yuki drive the Red Bull this weekend. And
yeah,
I'm just going to put it out there. Imagine if they did in front of those Japanese fans and he actually did something decent with it.
The problem is I just don't believe he will. I really find it hard to believe that Yuki's going to be that much better. It's the problems run way deeper than the specific driver in the car. I think it'd be really short-sighted of them to swap him around this early. I mean, I've also read today that Colapinto is going to be going to Racing Bulls to replace Tsunoda when Tsunoda goes to Red Bull. And then I've also read today that Colapinto is going to be in the Alpine car within the next 2 races. So, I mean, don't believe everything you read because not all of these things can be true. But
this is the thing. I think we're at the point now where, I mean, I was quite surprised to see him as Sky F1, Sky Sports News reporting it. So, well, it's weird because the actual broadcast they're putting out doesn't say. I don't think it actually outright says Yuki will be replacing Lawson, but the clickbaity titles on all the articles that lead to the video do.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the difference, where the actual content that they're putting out, but then everybody else is just throwing something to the wall and hoping it sticks. Like, it's easy to sit here and say Red Bull are confirming that Yuki will race in Japan, and then if it actually happens, oh look, see, I told you so. But then when it doesn't, it's just like, it was just satire. Yeah, like, it's easy to just shrug it off and just disappear. So when you've clicked on this video because the thumbnail is Law Gone or something, or Slowson, or some other Liam Lawson pun, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be the one. We will be the one F1 podcast this week who doesn't have a Lawson pun in the title. I promise.
Yeah, it's just not going to. I don't think swapping drivers around is going to solve the problem. As we said before, it's a much deeper problem that needs looking into, and just dropping yet another driver and swapping their own yet again.
Yeah.
They're just going to be stuck in the same cycle.
Agree.
It has been nice to see Verstappen backing him and publicly saying, like, yes, this is a very difficult car to drive. I understand where his struggles are. I don't think it would be good for anyone to start swapping drivers again, which is good to see.
Yeah.
Verstappen's kind of taken on this role as like looking out for all of the rookies this year, which is not a personality development I expected from Max Verstappen, but it's quite fun to see.
It's weird though, right? Do you know who else won 4 titles at Red Bull, didn't quite make a 5th, and then turned into a really nice guy all of a sudden?
Imagine.
Sebastian Vettel.
Yeah.
So he's on the Vettel trajectory. He's doing it a lot. Well, actually, he's not doing it that much younger than Vettel, to be fair.
No, I guess
so,
not. So,
like, basically, the minute he stopped being a title contender at Red Bull and moved to Ferrari and Aston and beyond, he just got nicer and nicer and nicer. Vettel's on the same trajectory. He's doing the same thing, man.
Everything's cyclical.
Yeah, everything. The DNFs.
Yeah, see?
the driver things. It's all cyclical. Right, on that note, I think we should end for this week. I think we've covered as much as we need to. If you would like to get in touch with us, we're on all the standard social media platforms, your X's, your Facebooks, your Instagrams, your TikToks, so you can just search and find us there. If you are watching this on YouTube, or you'd like to go watch it on YouTube, go ahead there. And if you're enjoying that content, obviously, please remember to like and subscribe for that. If you want to be part of my Discord, I know we mentioned it a couple of times already during this episode, like, you do get the opportunity to join us live while we're recording this and kind of be involved in a live chat. And as you've heard, we'll sort of dip in and out of trying to read those comments as we're broadcasting. So head to backofthegrid.com. There's links to everything there, or you can head directly to Patreon and at patreon.com/backofthegrid, and it's all on there. That is it for this week. So thank you very much, and we will be back next week to preview the Japanese Grand Prix. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.